Following World War II, a period of non-hostile belligerency built up between the democratic capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union known as the Cold War. During the Cold War, new weapons technology emerged, allowing for the ability to send rockets into space. This new rocket technology led to space technology, creating the start of where the space race began. The race for space technology can be traced back to Germany beginning in the 1930s and continuing during World War II, when Nazi Germany researched and built operational ballistic missiles. German aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun experimented with liquid-fueled rockets with the goal that one day they would reach high altitudes and navigate long distances into outer space. He built the A-4 rocket, later named the V-2 rocket, which became the first vehicle to reach outer space during its test flight programs in 1942 and 1943. Its supersonic speed meant there was no defense against it, and radar detection provided little to no warning. By the tail end of World War II, both the United States and the Soviet Union learned of its power, and the race to capture von Braun and his technology began. The United States prevailed with the acquirement of von Braun and most of his engineering team via Operation Paperclip, which they later helped develop the American missile and space exploration programs. Since the Soviet Union didn't have von Braun, they found a scientist, Sergei Korolev, that not only shared his vision of space exploration, but also had the capability and expertise to match. Korolev spent most of his time attempting to copy the V-2 rocket, but then surpassed his efforts by building more efficient rockets of his own. With both the United States and the Soviet Union now having ambitious scientists on their sides and the knowledge and ability to develop and build rockets, both countries set out to prove to the world their superiority of technology and military power. To do this, they each planned to be the first to explore space, creating the space race. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union pulled out ahead and launched Sputnik 1, the first Earth-orbiting satellite. About the size of a beach ball, weighing 183.9 pounds, Sputnik only took about 98 minutes to orbit the Earth. It was a landmark occasion nonetheless, and the Soviet Union had sent a message to the capitalist world. Sputnik's tracking signal could be heard on radios around the world, and millions tuned in to hear the beep, which was a startling reminder of Soviet power. Americans were shocked when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, intensifying fears that the United States was falling behind the Soviet Union in missile technology. The United States jolted into action and stepped up its own space exploration program. However, less than a month later, before the United States could make any significant progress, the Soviet Union sent a second satellite into orbit, Sputnik 2. But this time it had a passenger. Laika the dog proved that living beings could be sent into space. Laika captured the hearts of people all over the world, and in the public eye, the Soviet Union had taken a seemingly unquestionable lead in the space race. In response, the United States attempted to launch the Vanguard satellite in December 1957, but it ended in failure. Vanguard exploded on the launch pad and was dubbed Flopnik by the world's media. The United States regrouped with the successful launch in January 1958 of Explorer 1. Explorer 1 carried scientific equipment that eventually discovered the Van Allen radiation belts that encircled the Earth, and was quickly followed by Explorer 2 and 3 and Vanguard 1. Later that year, on October 1, 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA as we know it today, was created. Eisenhower commissioned the creation of NASA to oversee the space program and to make sure the United States caught up to the Soviet Union. The space race continued through the 1950s and 1960s, with the United States and Soviet Union competing for each progressive step of space exploration. However, the failure of Vanguard was still fresh in the minds of many, and the huge public success of the Soviet Union space program meant that the United States advances came too late to change public opinion. The perception of a technology gap in favor of the Soviet Union had been established. American pride was at a low, and the nation that had emerged from World War II as the most powerful was being humbled and technologically crippled by its enemy. In the face of this seeming defeat, the space race was showing to be a true battle of who was the best, and a race for survival began. The United States decided to aim for the moon. Their first attempt to launch in August 1958 failed when the rocket carrying the Pioneer Zero moon probe exploded on the launch pad. Although the United States had many failed attempts, success was eventually achieved with moon probe orbit and soft landings. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was also working on a moon launch, the lunar program, and the Soviet Union racked up more firsts. The first solar orbit, the first impact on the moon, the first photographs of the moon from a lunar orbit, which allowed the Soviet Union to name many of the moon's geological features. The United States began Project Mercury in 1958 with the goals of orbiting a manned spacecraft around the Earth, studying man's ability to function in space, and recovering both man and spacecraft safely. The United States proceeded with caution, launching a chimpanzee because they feared a manned failure. Upon successfully sending up Ham, the space chimp, on January 31, 1961, and returning safely, the United States celebrated, but it was short-lived. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet Union cosmonaut, became the first man in space to orbit Earth in the Vostok 1 capsule. Followed swiftly by the United States, on May 5, 1961, NASA's commander, Alan Shepard, became the first American in space in the Mercury 7 capsule. Even though the United States was not far behind, they still felt the sting of defeat. President John F. Kennedy met with advisors who felt that the only way to win the space race was to be the first to the moon. Kennedy led a call to action for the United States to continue to support NASA.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Project Mercury was followed by Project Gemini, whose purpose was to conduct various experiments in space and to work out some of the finer details relating to a man-moon mission. Gemini established that longer duration spaceflight was possible and demonstrated that it was possible for two vehicles to rendezvous and dock in space. On August 6, 1961, the Soviet Union struck again with the Vostok 2 capsule, which spent more than 25 hours in space, orbiting the Earth 17 times. The next year, on February 20, 1962, John Glenn became the first American in orbit. For the next 7 years, the United States and the Soviet Union raced neck and neck to the moon. The Soviet Union put the first woman in space in 1963, and a cosmonaut took the first spacewalk in 1965, followed by the first soft landing on the moon and the first orbit of the moon with a safe return. Ultimately, the United States prevailed on July 20, 1969, as part of the Apollo 11 mission. American Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first men to land on the moon.